presentation that Fred will be giving to us is Fred's presentation, and any presentation someone does, and I would almost go along, and I don't want to knock the thing because he can always erase this from the tape, but the part is that the opinions given at this time are not necessarily those of ours, but those of us who want to take any of them might do that. Would that be correct, Fred?
Yes.
I don't even know if these opinions are necessarily those of Fred's, but nevertheless, I think they're something for thought, and this is the purpose of our class, pretty much, to relate to which we're just going. So this is the thing that we do. So, Fred, if you want to just take it right now. That one. Thank you, Fred.
On that table over there in the beginning.
I have been asked, I didn't volunteer, but I asked to speak about my book, To Know What We Are, which I wrote 5 years ago. There are a number of things in the book, but I'm going to only talk about one of them. I don't have time to cover them all, of course. I'm going to talk about what I said here about Jesus, and what I think about Jesus, and how I came to write what I did. I have fairly good Christian credentials. I have attended church and been a church member literally all of my life. My parents were religious, and during college I was a Sunday school superintendent with a Sunday school with a number of departments, of which I was quite proud. I've thought a great deal about Jesus, and I've studied the Bible, and particularly the four Gospels, all of my life, reading it, and thinking about it, and reading it again. The Bible is a library of 86 books, written to cover the history of the Jewish people and their religious thought through about 500 years. Naturally, there are various authors, various opinions, and as you go to approach any library, I think you should select the part that you like and leave the parts that don't agree with it, because there are many contradictions, many differences. And I've always followed that. Not that I don't believe we can consistently say that everything in the Bible is equally and completely true, because we get into contradictions that we cannot solve if we do that. The New Testament deals with Jesus Christ entirely. We know really very little about Jesus' life and not too much about what he taught. I'll go into that later. The few facts that we know are something like this. Jesus was born about the year 6 B.C. of Jewish parents, very orthodox, religious people. His father Joseph could trace his ancestry back 1,000 years to King David. Jesus was raised in the province of Galilee, north of the Roman province of Judea. He spent most of his life in Galilee. He was the eldest of a large family. He had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters. When he was fairly young, his father died, and Jesus apparently took over his father's carpenter shop and helped to support the family. We know very little about his education. That is one of our great lacks of knowledge. We don't know whether he could write or not. We have no direct record that he wrote in the sand, but there's nothing. He left no writings. I think he could write. He was well educated in the Torah, our Old Testament. Knew a great deal about it. And of course, he had a very brilliant mind. When he was 27 years old, or when he was 33 years old, in the year 27 A.D., he left his home. His family didn't like it. And he started preaching and teaching around Galilee. He was a very fine teacher, and he attracted a great deal of attention, great crowds of people. He selected a group of 12 men about his own age, Galileans, none of them who were particularly well educated, most of them were illiterate, and none of them were very intellectual in their own right. Jesus looked at them, I think, as much as a shepherd looks at his flock, he being so much more intellectually gifted than they were. They followed him everywhere. He taught for 3 years around Galilee. The third year, he went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. There, he attracted a great deal of attention and created some disturbance. The religious authorities, Jewish religious authorities in Jerusalem, were worried about him, and they arranged with the Roman procurator or governor, Pontius Pilate, to have him executed, which was done. He was executed in that barbarous manner of the Romans, common to them, by being nailed to a cross. A man could be nailed to a cross and live as long as 3 days in great torture till he died. However, Jesus was executed on a Friday. And because it was against the Jewish law to have a body on the cross in such torture during the Sabbath, the people there asked the Romans to take him off the cross before sundown. But in order to assure his death, a Roman soldier put a spear into Jesus' side, which probably killed him. Now, I'm not going to talk about the disputed events following the execution immediately, except to say that his disciples went into hiding at first. Another group of people, which we don't have very much record of in the Bible, the Hellenes, the Greek-speaking people. Jesus, of course, spoke Aramaic. All these people spoke Aramaic. They did not speak Greek. But there were many Jews who spoke Greece in Jerusalem. And those people had another group led by Stephen. 7 years after Jesus was executed, Stephen was stoned to death, and the Hellenes, so-called, the Greek-speaking Jews, were driven out and dissipated by Paul. Now, the important thing to me has always been what Jesus taught. We have the records of the Gospels, particularly the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They were written long after the execution. The first one, Mark, was written about the year 75 A.D., while Jesus was executed in the year 30, or possibly 31 A.D., in the reign of Tiberius Caesar. I should mention that there was no record kept of his execution, there was no Roman record, no records at all that we can find about Jesus, except among those who believed in him that wrote later. But there's no contemporary records. But he just might never have been from all the historical records that we have until many 100 years later. Mark, book of Mark, short sayings of Jesus, some history, written in about 75 A.D., a few years after the Jews had rebelled, and the Roman general Titus had driven the Jews out, most of them, from Jerusalem. The next book, Matthew, written about 5 years later, 80 A.D.,